Hey everyone, it's Harry, your host. So, the House passed a budget bill that helps bring an end to a partial government shutdown, though it also had some real consequences tied to it, and some unresolved issues that could come right back around sooner than people expect. There's also a detail in this bill that most headlines skipped over, and it could affect what happens next in a pretty big way. And understanding this actually helps you make sense of what's going on in Washington right now and why it keeps feeling so unstable. Quick question for you before we get into it. Have you ever felt like these shutdown fights happen over and over again and never really get solved? Let me know in the comments. So here's what actually happened. The House narrowly passed a massive spending bill. We're talking about roughly $1.2 trillion. And that vote officially ended a brief but tense partial government shutdown. The vote was close, 217 to 214, which already tells you how divided things were. This bill now heads to President Donald Trump's desk, and he said very clearly that he plans to sign it immediately. That means most of the federal government is funded again, people are back to work, paychecks are flowing, and the immediate disruption has stopped. But, and this is important, the bill doesn't fund everything equally. Most government departments are funded through September 30th, which is the end of the fiscal year. That includes big areas like Treasury, Education, Labor, State, and Defense. However, the Department of Homeland Security was treated very differently. DHS only received a 2-week extension. That means in just a short amount of time, Congress is right back at the table facing another possible shutdown. This time focused almost entirely on immigration enforcement. Now, if you're thinking, wait, why isolate DHS like that? That's exactly the point. Lawmakers couldn't agree on immigration policy, so instead of letting the entire government stay closed, they basically separated the problem. Think of it like turning the power back onto most of the house while leaving one room on a temporary extension cord. It worked for now, but it's not a permanent fix. And the reason this fight got so intense and so emotional comes down to a specific event. During the shutdown negotiations, 2 Americans were fatally shot by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis. That incident completely changed the tone of the budget talks. What had been a more traditional funding debate suddenly became about accountability, enforcement tactics, and civil rights. Democrats especially said they could not support new DHS funding without real limits and oversight on how immigration enforcement operates. Now, this is where things get complicated and honestly where a lot of people start feeling frustrated with the whole process. Budget bills are usually about numbers, how much money goes where. But this one turned into a debate about how power is used, who gets held accountable, and what kind of enforcement is acceptable. So, even though the bill ended the shutdown, it didn't end the conflict at all. What's interesting is President Trump's role in all of this. In the past, he's been willing to let shutdowns drag on as a negotiating tactic, but this time, his approach was noticeably different. According to lawmakers involved in the talks, Trump made it clear he didn't want another prolonged shutdown. He reportedly said he hates shutdowns and wants them stopped. Publicly, he urged Republicans to back the deal without delay and warned against making last-minute changes. From his administration's point of view, reopening the government quickly helped avoid economic fallout and political damage, especially after the country had already experienced a lengthy shutdown not long ago. It also bought time. Instead of forcing an all-or-no fight, this bill pushed the hardest arguments into a short, intense window focused on DHS. Now, that didn't make the vote easy. Speaker Mike Johnson had a very tough time getting this through the House. The Republican majority is extremely narrow, and even a single defection could have sunk the bill. There were long delays, closed-door negotiations, and a lot of floor drama. In the end, most Republicans supported the bill, but 21 voted against it, mainly out of concern that it gave Democrats too much leverage on immigration issues. Democrats were even more divided. A large majority voted no, not because they wanted the shutdown to continue, but because they didn't want to approve even temporary funding for DHS without stronger reforms. Some Democratic lawmakers were very blunt, saying they did not want to fund what they see as an out-of-control enforcement operation. Others took a more strategic view. They argued that separating DHS funding actually gives them a clear fight. Instead of risking funding for the entire government, they can now focus pressure specifically on immigration enforcement practices. So, you see, this wasn't just a yes or no vote on reopening the government, it was a chess move. Different groups were thinking several steps ahead, even while federal workers and families were caught in the middle. Another thing to consider is what's actually in the bill. It rejected the deep spending cuts that the administration originally wanted, instead opting for more modest reductions across some departments. That means many programs people rely on avoided sharp cuts, at least for now. But again, DHS sits outside that stability. If Congress doesn't pass a new deal by the deadline, DHS funding expires, and that could trigger another partial shutdown focused on border enforcement and immigration services. Now, let's talk about what the next fight looks like, because this is where the real tension is. Senate Democrats have laid out a list of demands tied to DHS funding. These include banning federal immigration officers from wearing masks, requiring body cameras and visible identification, limiting roving patrols, and requiring judicial warrants for arrests and searches. They also want DHS agents held to the same use of force standards as state and local police, including independent investigations after violent incidents. From their perspective, these are basic accountability measures. They argue that no federal law enforcement agency should operate with fewer transparency rules than local police departments. They also point out that public trust erodes when officers operate anonymously, especially in communities already on edge. Though Republicans and administration officials see it very differently, they argue that some of these proposals would make enforcement unworkable. Speaker Johnson has said that requiring judicial warrants for every action would slow operations and isn't realistic. The administration maintains that DHS agents already operate under constitutional rules and that adding new layers could put officers at risk or reduce effectiveness. There's been one notable concession already. Homeland Security officials announced that immigration officers in Minneapolis will now use body cameras with plans to expand that program nationwide as funding allows. That move seems designed to calm public anger without agreeing to broader changes like banning masks or requiring warrants. Democrats, however, see this as insufficient. They argue that body cameras alone don't solve deeper issues around authority and oversight. What's more, this whole situation shows how shutdowns have changed over time. In the past, they were often about broad budget numbers or tax issues. Now, they're increasingly tied to specific cultural and political flashpoints. Immigration, in particular, has become a proxy for deeper disagreements about national identity, federal power, and civil liberties. And here's the part that affects regular people more than you might think. Even short shutdowns create uncertainty. Federal workers worry about missed paychecks. Contractors lose income. Services slow down. Markets don't like instability. And when these fights keep happening, people start to lose confidence that basic government functions can be maintained without drama. For now, yes, the government is open again. Most departments are funded. Paychecks are going out. That's the good news. But the narrow vote margins and the short DHS deadline mean this calm could be temporary. If lawmakers can't reach an agreement by the next deadline, we could be right back here again having the same conversation, watching the same brinkmanship play out. And guess what? Even if they do reach a deal, it might just be another short-term fix. Some lawmakers have already warned that Congress could simply kick the can down the road again. That keeps the government running, but it doesn't solve the underlying disagreements. So, when people say, why does this keep happening? The answer is because these budget bills are no longer just about money. They're about values, enforcement, and accountability. And those are much harder to compromise on. I'll say this, too. It's okay to feel worn out by it. A lot of you have said they feel like shutdowns are always called temporary, but the stress feels very real every time. That feeling makes sense. Even when the government reopens quickly, the uncertainty leaves a mark. As we watch what happens next, keep an eye on that DHS deadline. That's where the next big decision sits. Whether lawmakers find a real compromise or just buy a little more time will tell us a lot about where this political moment is headed. Thank you for watching. If you like my video, please subscribe my channel.